This is one of the things I really wanted to ask you about, because I do think in evolutionary terms and across the time scale that evolutionary biologists and physicists have come to accept. And so that's a universe that's about 15 billion years old on a planet that's about 4.5 billion. And with life being 3.5 and mammalian life, say, being 60 million years, that's my time span. The biblical time span is much truncated in relationship to that. And that sets up a certain tension between the biblical stories, certainly if they're read as objective truth. Yeah. But the Catholic Church, from my understanding, has, and this comes from the Pope himself, the Catholic Church has already accepted the basic tenets of evolution. But I don't know, yes, is that wrong?
Sure. Oh, no, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. So, but that begs the question, because for me, and I'm sure this is part of the sticking point for young people, and maybe for people in Western culture in general, is that it's easy to say that evolutionary theory has been accepted, but that still begs the question. It's right. Okay. So fine. You can look at the span of life over 3.5 billion years before you get to human beings. But our religious stories talk of a reality that looks like it's about 15,000 years old, something like that.
Right.
And so that, I'm not blaming the church for that, obviously. And I think the stories in the Bible are far older than 5,000 to 10,000 years. I suspect they were part of an extraordinarily ancient oral tradition that stretches back tens of thousands of years, because that's the rule rather than the exception. And I don't know to what degree the Catholic thinkers within the church are working constantly to attempt to reconcile these two viewpoints, apart from saying that they do accept them both.
Yeah, but I don't think I think they're apples and oranges in a way. I mean, I don't worry too much about that issue. I'm not trying to read the Bible as a scientific text. It's not about the evolutionary process. It's a theological and spiritual text that's discerning truths that are, I think, available within our experience. But they're discrete moments there. I mean, the scientist who talks about evolution, fine, I listen to him or her. The Bible's not concerned so much with that. But it's giving us a theological interpretation of history and indeed of the cosmos, but not in scientific terms. So it has implications for our understanding of the cosmos for sure, and of nature, of human nature, but it's not done in a scientific manner. So it just predates, as you say. I mean, any of what we'd associate now with the scientific method, the last biblical text is around the year 100 AD. And so it long predates that preoccupation. So to me, it's like kind of an apples and oranges issue. And I think that a lot of that religion science stuff in that sense is an early 20th century preoccupation that we should just get beyond.
Right. But I think that may be the case, but I don't think people have gone beyond it. And,
no,
I also think that, and this pertains to something we also talked about discussing, which was the continual drain from the church, the Catholic Church, perhaps in particular, but perhaps not in the West, of young people. And I think part of that is their inability to make intellectual sense of everything that they're faced with, a religious tradition and a scientific tradition, especially on the biological front. But not only that, they don't know where to place these things in their view of the world. I think that's partly why my lectures, because you'd asked about that, had become popular, because I am trying to do that. And
no, I'll say this. You look at the surveys, there's a lot of surveys now that ask young people precisely that question: how come you left? And people speculate, oh, it must be because of the scandals, or because they had a bad experience in church or something. Number one reason across many years in all the surveys is, I don't believe the teachings. And then to specify that, religion and science seem to be at odds with each other. So for young people, the scientific way of knowing is the way of knowing. So it's sort of scientism, at least implicitly, holds sway in the minds of a lot of young people. So once you make that move, knowledge equals the scientific manner of knowing. Well, then the Bible is non-scientific. Therefore, it's, old superstition, Bronze Age mythology, et cetera. And see, what you were doing, Jordan, I think, you were doing what a lot of the church fathers did with the scriptures, because the church fathers are very interesting. People like Origen and Augustine and Chrysostom and those people. They knew fully well in the 3rd and 4th century that the Bible should not simply be read in a sort of, a straightforwardly literalistic way. Augustine knew that very clearly. Origen knew that clearly. And they talk, therefore, about the different senses of Scripture. What you're doing, I think, in a lot of your lectures is what Origen would have called the moral sense of the Bible, the tropological, to give it its kind of technical term. The biblical texts are about the moral life. Now, we might say today the psychological life, or what makes you psychologically healthier or more productive. They would have said the moral sense. They knew all about that. And so the texts begin to open up in these marvelous ways. So, Noah and the ark, Jacob and wrestling with the angel and the ladder going up to heaven, et cetera, et cetera. If you start fussing about, the literal truth of these stories, you're going to miss these really deep spiritual insights, which the church fathers knew very well. And I think you were in your own way tapping into that. And the fact that young people were responding to it, I think is very encouraging. That's why I told the bishops, it's a positive sign that you were getting the audiences you were getting around this.
Well, the problem with the scientific viewpoint, technically speaking, is that it's amoral within its own confines. By definition, it strives not to address issues of value. Now, it can't help it because scientists have to investigate some things and not others, so value enters into it. But by its own nature, science can't answer and tries not to answer questions of value. Now, it gets more complicated when you look at work like the primatology I discussed earlier, the origin of morality in animals and game playing, say, among rats. That starts to move into the domain of morality to some degree. But the problem with science is that it strips out all subjective meaning. It's designed to do that. And that leaves everyone at a loss about what to do with the world of value. And I do believe that stories in particular address the world of value. That's their function. And the world of value is the world that we act in. They're guides to action.
Well, I come across it all the time in my work on the internet. So I have, dialogues with people that interact with my videos, and they'll say things like, well, the sciences give us access to the truth, period. The scientific method, that's how you get to the truth. And I'll say, so Hamlet tells you nothing true. Plato tells you nothing true. T.S. Eliot's poetry tells you nothing true. I mean, who would believe that except the most ideologically scientific person? But see, my fear is a lot of young people are in the grip of that. They're in the grip of a real ideological science.
They don't know how to think their way out of it. And so they just abandon the attempt, but it leaves them nowhere.
What you were doing, though, is you're showing a way out. And there is a way out. And it's by, an introduction into the great masters of these texts to show you how they function. That's what a good preacher ought to be doing,